my good friend Trevor Loudon.
The year was 1984. Ronald Reagan had decided to seek a second term. Carl Lewis set a world record for the indoor long jump. And in my home country of New Zealand, our socialist Labour government had destroyed our military alliance with the United States. They decided to ban nuclear warships from our harbours.
Nuclear weapons are morally indefensible, and I support that proposition.
I began digging for answers. I met and interviewed security experts, even former New Zealand communist spies. I discovered that my country's national security had been betrayed by enemies within. This sparked 20 years of research into communism. It drew me inevitably to the movement's #1 target, the United States of America. The underside of American politics became my new focus. I began touring America, scouring communist archives in your libraries. I started sharing this vital information with anyone who would listen.
As I continued my research, I was shocked to find that the same underground culture that had infiltrated and reshaped New Zealand was also infiltrating every American institution. What was once considered the American dream is now considered xenophobic, racist, and fascist.
What was once considered Marxist and Leninist is now considered inclusive and progressive. As an outsider, I could see that the future of this great country is now hanging in the balance.
In my travels, I'm asked one question repeatedly. Why does a New Zealander care about the United States? I say there are two basic reasons. The first is gratitude. My country was saved from invasion by the Imperial Japanese Army in World War II by the massive sacrifice of your fathers and uncles and grandfathers at the battles of Guadalcanal, the Coral Sea and Midway. That is a very strong memory in my country today, folks. The second reason is related, a little more selfish. If freedom should fail in the United States, if you lose your Constitution, your liberty, your economic dynamism, and your military superiority, all of which are in grave danger, the bad guys of this planet, I'm talking Russia, China, Iran, they will carve up this planet amongst themselves, folks.
If nothing changes, the world you and I grew up in will soon be but a memory. The world we leave to our sons and daughters will be but a shadow of what God has intended for them. Your Constitution warns you to guard against enemies, foreign and domestic. These are the stories that the enemies in your government and in the mainstream media do not want you to hear. This is our last stand. These are the enemies within.
Are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Most communists don't say they're communists. They say they're socialists. That sounds a little softer.
Socialism has spread the shadow of human regimentation over most of the nations of the earth.
This isn't back in the 50s. This is going on right now, folks.
Their strategy is to undermine the confidence of our people in the American system and the principles on which it stands.
I don't think President Obama cares about our U.S. Constitution or our traditional American values.
If a person supports organizations which reflect communist teachings, he may be a communist.
He's been doing everything in his power to undermine the United States.
If a person defends the activities of communist nations while consistently attacking the domestic and foreign policy of the United States, he may be a communist.
If America is weakened, our allies are weakened. And then we talk about dominoes.
If a person does all these things over a period of time, he must be a communist.
And they are working hardcore to transform this country.
The socialists, the communists, and their followers would like to see the American spirit extinguished.
You've got an infiltration of our entire government.
But there are other communists who don't show their real faces, who work more silently.
There are congressmen who have actively colluded with the enemy.
the enemy is within, because they are in our government.
The cleverest thing the devil ever did was to convince people he doesn't exist. You're working with the Department of Homeland Security. You are compiling databases of terrorist suspects. Can you tell us what you did after that?
Well, I finished the case up. I put it in the system. There were 67 records related to the case, individuals and organizations. Within about 2 weeks after I put the case into the system, I went on vacation and I was called from my colleague and said that they had removed the records entirely from the system. They didn't just modify them, they completely obliterated them, took them out. Those are the records related to the network of mosques and organizations operating in the United States that is linked to the San Bernardino shooting and to the Orlando shooting. Not only did they remove the records, but they also investigated me.
For what possible reason?
They said essentially that I did not have the authority to put those records into the system, even though I had been commended by the National Targeting Center for finding 300 terrorists. So essentially the last 3 years of my career, I was under investigation by 3 different government agencies, all at the same time. They determined that I was essentially more of a threat than these terrorist groups.
So did they ever claim that any of the records were inaccurate or untrue?
No, they couldn't, because they were accurate.
So you were trying to do your job and you were basically persecuted by your own government. How does that make you feel as a professional intelligence officer?
Infuriated and stripped naked. It's a public humiliation. To sequester me in a small room for the last 11 months of my career with no assigned duties, and then have the audacity to say that those were not adverse actions. We're just conducting an investigation. It's cruel to do that to a person. It wasn't a moral infraction. It wasn't refusal to obey an order. It wasn't some crime that I committed. It was simply doing the job that I took a vow to do and had been recognized and awarded for.
Are there enemies in this country working to destroy this country?
I would say emphatically yes.
Could Hillary Clinton pass an FBI security check?
No, because if you have overt ties to organizations with known associations with terrorism, you cannot pass a background check.
2 years ago, I've got a friend who applied for a federal government job 2 years ago. The FBI drove to Canada to interview his communist uncle. On the strength of that interview, my friend was denied that position. Not because he was a communist, because his uncle was. So the point is this: your government has enemies who will use your weak and dishonest against you. Therefore, employees of the federal government need to be vetted.
When I applied for a government job, you fill out various forms. The forms that I filled out many years ago for government positions asked extensive questions about your background and your ideological affiliations. It could be from far right Nazi to far left communist or anything in between. The government wanted to know whether you were going to be a loyal citizen and uphold the Constitution. Today, they hardly ask you anything, so people basically can lie.
Most people think that the communists' infiltration of your government is a thing of the past.
You're not allowed to talk about communism. And if you do, you're called crazy and insane. So that tends to quiet you. I call that censorship through ridicule.
The Berlin Wall fell down. So why are you talking about the communist strategy in America? And isn't that a bit far-fetched for most people to swallow?
Unfortunately, it is. They've done a very, very good job of deceiving the American people.
This couldn't have happened without the Soviet Union collapsing. Took away the image of the enemy, said the Soviet Georgy Arbatov.
The collapse of the Soviet Union has actually advanced the communist cause around the world.
Collapse is part of their attack, exactly.
With the seeming disappearance of the Soviet threat, why would Americans care about communism any longer? What if those communists had simply morphed into progressives or democratic socialists? Here I am in Chicago to mingle with 3,000 progressives, democratic socialists, and old-style communists. Can you tell the difference? Welcome to the People's Summit.
When we talk about socialism, it helps people to understand that some aspects of American society are already socialized.
I think our basic definition of socialism is the workers owning the means of production, democratic control.
The true needs of the people.
Finding creative ways to restore fairness to healthcare, to the economy, to opportunities.
There's never been a period where people are so open to discuss socialism.
Our society so utterly fails to provide people with a decent standard of living, to provide people with freedom.
We're interested in working with other parts of the left, other parts of the working class movement to fight for the most ambitious demands that it's possible to win right now.
We need to start with more ambitious plans, knowing that the reality is that those plans will always get squashed down to half their size.
We are revolutionaries. We would like to have some kind of a mass revolutionary movement.
When you say socialism coming to America, do you think it can come peacefully, or do you think there's going to have to be upheaval, or is it going to be a combination? How do you see it coming?
Well, I don't think we're going to get socialism by an election.
I accept the reality that everything that's done here in the United States is not the best. And this notion of American exceptionalism, I guess, that if we do it, it must be the best, it's just not true.
You still have the communist vision that you once had, as a young man. You still that communist vision is still there. It can be achieved.
I say communism for me is it's never existed anywhere, but it's like the North Star. It helps keep me on track.
It's incredible. Only one side is fighting, and the side that's getting beat up doesn't even realize they're in a fight.
This movement will always be here in one form or another.
Democratic socialism is like stage 1 cancer. Even in Sweden, France or Germany, it keeps slowly growing and will always eventually morph into terminal communism. Joel Frewa knows Venezuelan communism firsthand.
That old school communism that you saw with the USSR, it's not dead, it's alive and well, and it's not just in North Korea or Cuba. It's a 3-hour flight from Miami. Let's talk basic items: toilet paper, medicine, chicken, milk, powdered milk. You can't find them. It almost seems cartoonish or foreign, but when people go to the grocery store, they go in hope that they have the items that they need. I recently saw a tweet on Valentine's Day where a husband tweeted to his wife a photo where his Valentine's Day present was toilet paper. He made a heart of it and tweeted that to his wife because that was the present, because it's so hard to come by. People are dying waiting for medicines to come in. Yet the Maduro government, what they do is they blame it on the corporations who are hoarding these items in order to create unrest, which is completely false.
What do you think of American congressmen like Jose Serrano from New York, who praised Hugo Chavez on a regular basis? Greg Meeks attended his funeral. Several American congressmen were well-known supporters of Hugo Chavez. What do you think of those people?
To put it very lightly, I think they're scum. I think to support a regime which is so overtly oppressive of its people, it's quite frankly disgusting.
So how do good people get drawn into such a movement?
If a person is hostile to communism, it's because of capitalist propaganda. So why would you walk up to somebody and tell them the whole truth? It would just alienate them, and it would be premature to do so. Much better to find a way to unite with them and to hide your long-term intentions until they were ready to hear them. That only makes sense, doesn't it?
Whatever problem you have, they always somehow bring it that the solution is socialism. They take advantage of people's vulnerabilities and their needs. They're experts at it.
It doesn't matter if you're talking about welfare. It doesn't matter if you're talking about cultural issues like gay rights or homosexual marriage. It doesn't matter if you're talking about economic issues, military issues. No matter what it is, for the left, the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution.
In the 70 years the Soviets were leading the world communist movement, in that 70 years, the number that my people say is 150 million murdered. That's the number of the people communists killed. That's the equivalent of the Trade Center, the two towers coming down, 2 of them every day for 70 years.
pulling the trigger on somebody else was an act of love, because it meant that you were protecting or saving or dramatically improving the lives of people for not just now, but for millions of years in the future. I think of myself now as one of the sweetest, gentlest people on earth. I mean, I would rather catch a fly in a styrofoam cup and take it out the door than kill the fly. But back when I was a young communist, I was potentially one of the most dangerous people on the planet. Don't murder the kids, because the kids could probably have some sort of re-education. But if somebody is preventing the socialist utopia from coming into being, they are an enemy of humanity. If you were on the wrong side of history, your life was worthless to me.
So is there still a communist movement in America? How influential could these people possibly be?
Well, what is the difference between a Democrat and a socialist? I used to think there was a big difference. What do you think it is? What's the big difference between a Democrat and a socialist? You're the chairman of the Democratic Party. Tell me the difference between you and a socialist.
America's largest communist organization is 7,000 strong, 60 chapters nationwide, Democratic Socialists of America. Like all communists, DSA wants to abolish all private business and start a workers' revolution.
I'm a Democratic Socialist, probably because when I was 14, I read the Communist Manifesto. I believe that the working class is an agent of revolutionary change, and that our society needs to see a revolutionary transformation.
Based on the theories of Italian communist Antonio Gramsci, DSA seeks communist revolution through infiltration of America's leading institutions, cultural, religious, and political. DSA has infiltrated both houses of Congress. In the House, they have allies like New York Congressman Jerry Nadler, Chicago Reps Danny Davis and Jan Schakowsky, Californians Karen Bass and Maxine Waters, Iowan Dave Loebsack, Eleanor Holmes Norton from the District of Columbia, Alan Grayson from Florida, John Lewis from Georgia, and Gwen Moore and Mark Pocan from Wisconsin. DSA's U.S. Senate friends include Barbara Mikulski from Maryland, Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, and Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey from Massachusetts.
DSA's greatest success has undoubtedly been presidential candidate Bernie Sanders.
We have 80 votes in Congress now. We have the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which Bernie founded.
Bernie Sanders claims to be a democratic socialist who wants America to be more like Sweden, Denmark, Norway.
He wants America to look more like Scandinavia.
That's right. And what's wrong with that?
Like most democratic socialists, Bernie Sanders is a liar and a communist.
Sometimes American journalists talk about how bad a country is because people are lining up for food. That's a good thing. In other countries, people don't line up for food. The rich get the food and the poor starve to death.
In 2014, Sanders endorsed longtime Communist Party supporter Chuy Garcia's bid for the Chicago mayoralty. Sanders spoke alongside Scott Marshall, a leader of the Chicago Communist Party. In the early 1960s, Bernie Sanders studied in Chicago, where he joined the Young People's Socialist League and worked for the Communist Party-controlled Packing House Workers Union. In 1963, Bernie Sanders traveled to Israel as a guest of the pro-Soviet Hashemir Hitzat Youth Organization. Sanders worked on the Sha'ar Hamakim kibbutz, whose co-founder, Aharon Cohen, was in jail for spying for Moscow. Sanders was later kicked out of the kibbutz for being too lazy. By 1972, Sanders was in Vermont and active in the far-left Liberty Union Party. In 1980, Sanders backed the presidential campaign of pro-Cuba Socialist Workers' Party candidate Andrew Pulley. In 1985, while serving as mayor of Burlington, Vermont, Bernie Sanders was in Nicaragua celebrating the 6th anniversary of the brutal communist Sandinista dictatorship.
Bernie Sanders visited the Soviet Union on his honeymoon.
In 1988, Sanders and his new bride honeymooned in the then Soviet Union, which at the time was still threatening the United States with nuclear annihilation. Sanders negotiated with communist authorities to make Yaroslavl, near Moscow, a sister city of Burlington, Vermont.
Could you imagine if you visited Nazi Germany before the war ended, and then you're going to run for president here? You don't think there'd be questions?
In 1989, Sanders traveled to Cuba, where he attempted to meet communist dictator Fidel Castro. He later praised Castro for his wonderful government-run healthcare.
Just because Ronald Reagan dislikes these people does not mean to say that the people in their own nations feel the same way.
In his first congressional race, Bernie Sanders was personally endorsed by journalism icon and Democratic Socialist of America supporter I.F. Stone. Stone praised Bernie Sanders for his pragmatic socialism. Stone was later identified as a paid Soviet spy. Bernie Sanders has worked with DSA for more than 30 years.
It was DSA money and volunteers that put Bernie Sanders into the Congress in the first place and then into the US Senate.
The DSA was the backbone of Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign. Labour for Bernie was run by DSAer Rand Wilson, and People for Bernie was led by another DSA comrade, Charles Lenchner.
And we feel the Bernie Sanders movement was a very positive movement. What it did in this country, where the term socialism was a term that was kind of had a negative connotation, suddenly that's been transformed. And we talk to young people especially, and they're all interested in socialism now.
Do you think Bernie Sanders could pass an FBI background security check? DSA's closest ally in the takeover of the Democratic Party is the smaller but highly influential Communist Party USA.
I remember going with another comrade to meet with Howard Berman, who was a Democratic Party congressman, and giving him our demands and asking for him to include that in his program, and that we in exchange would provide campaign workers who would go door to door and help him get reelected.
Did he realize you were a Communist Party member?
Oh, yeah.
So the Communist Party would go to a Democratic congressman and in exchange for him promoting certain policies, you would help him get elected. There was a deal made. And was that a common thing in the Communist Party? Would they often cooperate with Democrats where they could?
Wherever they could, and they particularly targeted certain organizations. The ADA, Americans for Democratic Action, was a large pressure lobbying group within the Democratic Party in Southern California, and the Communist Party was very active in shaping the policy programs of that organization.
Which would in turn shape the policies of the Democratic Party.
Right.
Most congressmen on the left could not pass a security check whatsoever. Senator Barack Obama could not have passed a security check whatsoever.
Let me ask you, sir, just how serious a threat to our national security are these communist subversive activities in the United States today?
Well, I think they're serious. I think it's a matter that we should continue to give great care and attention to. We should support the laws which the United States has passed in order to protect us from those who would destroy us from within.
Once, the Democratic Party was strongly opposed to communism and socialism. Now, not so much.
Yeah, we're part of what I kind of call the progressive pro-labor wing of the Democratic Party. I mean, it's no secret.
For some reason, back in the 30s, the communists decided that the Democratic Party was the one to target. And even that far back, they began infiltrating the Democratic Party with real communist agents, and many of whom were Soviet agents as well. And that hasn't changed. They targeted the Democratic Party. They saw the Democratic Party as the best vehicle to promote communism by another name.
The Communist Party USA has influence and control over many members of your Congress. In Washington State, Communist Party leader Tim Wheeler works hard to elect Senator Patty Murray, a longtime Communist favorite. In Ohio, Communist boss Rick Nagin has run several times on the Democratic Party ticket and works very closely with former Congressman Dennis Kucinich. In Minnesota, top communist Mark Frumke has ties to Senators Amy Klobuchar and Al Franken and to Governor Mark Dayton. In Arizona, Congress members Raul Grijalva and Kirsten Sinema both got their start in Communist Party circles. The Communists are very close to Californian Barbara Lee.
I've been to Cuba over 20 times.
Top-ranking Democrat on the Homeland Security Committee, Benny Thompson of Mississippi, has worked with several Communist Party fronts. In Texas, Armed Services Committee member Mark Vasey works very closely with leading Dallas communist Gene Lantz. Connecticut Armed Services Committee member Joe Courtney also has Communist Party connections. Another senior Connecticut Democrat, Rosa DeLauro, is co-chair of the House Democratic Steering and Policy Committee, where she appoints fellow Congress members to influential House committees. In August 2010, Rosa DeLauro keynoted a conference at the Connecticut Communist Party headquarters with her good friend Joelle Fishman.
I chair the Political Action Commission of the party nationally, and I also chair the Communist Party in Connecticut, which is my home base.
Joelle Fishman's Political Action Committee is the Communist Party body delegated to liaise with the Democratic Party and to help elect as many far-left Democrats to Congress and the Senate as possible, like Chicago Representative Bobby Rush.
Murder. The pigs murdered Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton. I proved it to the world that Fred Hampton was murdered by the pigs.
The immediate, violent, criminal reaction of the occupants in shooting at announced police officers emphasizes the extreme viciousness of the Black Panther Party.
Today, a day after Chicago police shot it out with the Black Panthers, killing 2 of them, they raided the apartment of another Panther leader, Bobby Rush.
We found a small quantity of shotgun, rifle, and pistol ammunition, a small foreign-make Derringer, a small quantity of marijuana.
Just because someone wears a hoodie.
Training manuals, Army training manuals on booby traps, explosives and demolitions, and shotguns.
Does not make them a hoodlum.
And quite a bit of reading material on revolutionary reading material such as Che Guevara, Mao Tse-tung, and this sort of thing.
Take a look at these Communist Party policies that have wormed their way into your Congress.
My cousin, she came from Venezuela seeking political asylum about 6 months ago. This is almost going to sound like a made-up story, but I wish it was. She called me one day crying, and she asked me, I just heard a speech by Hillary Clinton. How is it possible that I left Venezuela under so much oppression, and I'm coming here and I'm hearing the exact same speech that Maduro gives?
So you would compare a communist dictator in Venezuela basically espousing the same ideas that a serious contender for the US presidency would espouse.
Not just a serious presidential contender. I would compare most of the Democrat Party to Latin American-style socialists, 100%.
So how effective has the Communist Party been at influencing the Democratic Party? In March 2009, Vice President Joe Biden traveled to Chile to meet with that country's communist-backed president, Michelle Bachelet, and Brazil's pro-communist president, Lula da Silva.
We are moving as rapidly as we can to change the direction of our country and our policies. We're going to have to ask, and we don't expect to get it, but we have to ask for a little bit of patience.
The Democrats, their party planks are all the planks of the Communist Party. They just present it a slightly different way. They present it as progressivism, or they present it as liberalism, or they present it as spreading the wealth, or giving the little guy a chance.
Democratic leadership have also partnered with the Party of European Socialists, an alliance of democratic socialists and former Stalinist European communist parties.
The cooperation between our parties has intensified significantly in the past 2.5 years, with regular contact at Congress, Senate, party and foundation levels. The attendance of President Clinton and myself at the Global Progressive Forum World Conference in Brussels in 2009 proves this point very well.
You are here to grapple with a problem that progressives in every country have been facing really for 20 years at least, since the fall of the Berlin Wall. How do we support a more integrated world where borders are coming down and still preserve a sense of social justice and fairness?
The PEZ has been a reliable partner for a long time. I'm glad you're having this Congress now, and its outcome can only be one, a stronger Party of European Socialists. Because what we need today is a strong PEZ and a strong Democratic Party working together. Progressives need it, the planet needs it, and our people need it.
The change is happening in the United States of America. And we want to have that change also in Europe. I believe in a European dream. More social, more equal, and greener Europe. Yes, we can!
So what is the main roadblock to world socialism?
They don't say we're trying to weaken the military. They're just saying if we didn't have to spend all this war money and all this money for weapons, we'd have the health care, there'd be no crippled, there'd be no hungry.
Another huge source of funds is the reordering of government priorities away from military spending.
The key to the policies we want lies in shifting some of the funding from military to domestic programs.
The Council for a Livable World has done more damage to the US military than most armies could ever dream of.
Back when we were battling the Soviets, they were among the Soviets' most reliable propaganda allies here in the United States.
Coincidentally, Democratic Socialists of America is also very strong inside the Council for a Livable World. Longtime Council Director Jerome Grossman was close to Boston Democratic Socialists of America and was a brother-in-law of New York DSA comrade Victor Sedell. The Council's Political Action Committee, Peace PAC, was run by David Bonnier, once second-ranked Democrat in the House of Representatives and now a dues-paying DSA member. The Council's current director is DSA-endorsed former Massachusetts Congressman John Tierney. The Council for a Livable World was founded in 1962 by Leo Szilard, a supporter of the failed Hungarian Communist Revolution of 1919. Leo Szilard fled to the United States, where he became a prominent nuclear physicist and a leader of the Manhattan Project, which created the first US atomic bomb. The council began modestly. It funded socialist-leaning Senate candidates in low-budget elections in small states. These grateful new senators would then be lobbied by the council to vote to reduce US military spending and cut nuclear arms programs at every possible opportunity.
Council for a Livable World has been endorsing candidates since 1962. We endorse in races where the person we endorse has a strong chance of winning, has a good positions on our issues, and is running against someone whose positions we don't agree with.
So tell me how the Council for a Livable World aided the Soviet cause.
Well, first of all, they had about a 100-degree correlation between their line and the Soviet line, and always being a reliable, quote-unquote, neutral peace activist voice out there to blast any efforts to improve American defense and to pretty much demand everything that the Soviets were demanding without sounding like they were Soviet agents.
In 50 years, the Council has funded over 200 Congress members.
I do want to thank the Council for a Livable World.
And 130 senators, including over 40 of the current Democratic delegation.
And I want to thank so much the supporters of Council for a Livable World.
I'm very proud to have the support of the Council for a Livable World.
Thank you to the Council for being such a great friend to me from the very beginning.
Thank you for the invaluable support you provide to candidates like me.
The Council for a Livable World has funded Senators Tim Kaine, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden.
My ties to the Council run long and deep, stretching way back to my first campaign for the United States Senate. That help has continued throughout my entire career. especially when I was chairman of the United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And it continues to this very day.
Now it's much more mainstream with Obama, Clinton, Biden, those policies. Council for a Livable World is, you can't dismiss it as a radical group anymore because it's now center left, whereas before it had been far left, even though it hasn't changed its basic views.
In 1994, former Soviet KGB officer Pavel Sudoplatov spilled the beans on Council for a Livable World founder Leo Szilard. Sudoplatov revealed that Leo Szilard had been a fully recruited Soviet agent. Stalin's spy chief Lavrenti Beria had personally ordered that Leo Szilard's political influence was to be exploited to communist advantage. Leo Szilard's mission was to eliminate America's nuclear superiority over the Soviet Union.
So for a group like the Council for a Livable World to exist for decades, scrupulously following the Soviet line, then to have its founder unmasked as a controlled Soviet agent by one of the control officers, that changes the picture completely.
The Council for a Livable World has been able to influence US defense policies for decades. The Council also claims to have influenced several major arms limitation treaties signed with the Soviet Union or Russia, all of which benefited Moscow and damaged the United States. But is this just boasting? How successful has the Council for a Livable World actually been?
From ratifying the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty and START to establishing a nuclear testing moratorium here at home, to the Chemical Weapons Convention, and to this very day, your support and guidance during our recent effort to ratify New START.
Never in my lifetime did I believe I would witness this great country of ours being withdrawn from our world leadership role and taken down by our own administration.
The American military of today is not the American military of the first Persian Gulf War. People remember how we managed to move vast numbers of troops and material and supplies. We were using the Ronald Reagan legacy of our preparedness to prosecute World War III in NATO Europe, and we actually used it during the first Persian Gulf War. And, it was so impressive, and these advanced technologies were so impressive. And most Americans today still think, I believe, that we have those kinds of capabilities, but we don't.
You're decimating our capabilities, so that today we're winding up with the smallest army prior to World War II, the smallest Navy prior to World War I. And just to give you an example of what we're competing against, the Chinese are building 60 ships a year. We're building 10, 9.
Our Navy is smaller now than any time since 1917. Our Air Force is older and smaller than any time since it was founded in 1947.
Well, Governor, we also have fewer horses and bayonets.
We can let the Russians build up their forces. We can cut ours back in Europe because America has such overwhelming nuclear superiority that the conventional forces are really secondary.
That used to be the argument. And there was a time in the Cold War, early in the Cold War, before we had the nuclear arms race and they caught up to us, where that was true. If you count the nuclear warheads the way the Obama administration does, they try to make it sound like parity, but they're leaving out a whole category of Russian nuclear weapons in order to do that. Mostly what people read about in the newspapers these days is the strategic nuclear balance, the number of weapons we have on our long-range nuclear missiles and bombers. And there's a treaty, the START Treaty, Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. And under the terms of that treaty, we do still have parity in terms of the strategic weapons. We've got 1,500, they've got 1,500. However, they never talk about the tactical nuclear balance. And if you take the lowest numbers for their tactical nuclear arsenal, it's 3,000 weapons today. It could be as high as 20,000. But if you take the lowest number, 3,000, all right? 3,000 tactical nuclear weapons, plus the 1,500 long-range strategic nuclear weapons, is 4,500 nuclear weapons. We've got 1,500 long-range strategic weapons and 200 obsolete tactical nuclear. I hope we still have them.
Just 200.
200 are left, and they're just old gravity bombs that are bunkered in West Germany. The Russians even know exactly where they are. So that's 1,700 nuclear weapons in the overall nuclear balance. versus 4,500. They have an overwhelming advantage in the overall nuclear balance numerically and technologically, because their strategic weapons, too, are brand new. They're advanced strategic weapons, whereas our strategic weapons, those long-range weapons, there are many experts who wonder if we actually have a nuclear deterrent anymore. You know, the missiles and the weapons themselves are much older than the flight crews that have to maintain these weapons.
Republican candidates who keep saying the incompetency of the Obama administration is unbelievable. Well, let me tell you, they're not incompetent at all. They have a strategy. They have executed it brilliantly.
The most significant thing your president said in his entire first term of office, when he was caught off mic in South Korea, off mic so he thought, with then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, thought no one was listening.
My last election, yeah. After my election, I have more flexibility.
Yes, said Medvedev, I understand. I will pass your message on to Vladimir. We are with you.
What sitting president of the United States would make excuses to his Russian counterpart and promise he'll be more flexible after his re-election?
They think like Obama just parachuted in the White House. Obama is like the surfer riding the perfect wave. 90 years, 100 years of communist education, agitation, and propaganda. Obama just harvested that.
President Obama's deep ties to radicals like Hawaiian communist Frank Marshall Davis, the pro-Soviet Chicago politician Alice Palmer, former Weather Underground terrorist leaders Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn, and the Marxist pastor Reverend Jeremiah Wright,
not God bless America, God damn America,
are well documented.
But is there any proof that Barack Obama was not merely some form of anti-colonialist, but an actual communist? John Drew knew the young Obama at Occidental College.
I met Barack Obama through Caroline Boss, a long-term girlfriend for about 2 years. She was definitely a hardcore Marxist revolutionary. Barack Obama drove up to the Boss's house with his friend Hassan Chandu. And I knew Hassan Chandu from the earlier anti-apartheid movement, but Barack Obama was a complete stranger to me. He was very tall, very dignified. He was dressed really well, like a GQ model. Caroline, while we were standing outside waiting for Chandu and Obama to come into the house, had told me that Obama and Chandu were with us, meaning that they were part of our radical, revolutionary, Marxist-Leninist cohort. So they were in our secret club, basically. And we were smoking cigarettes, having a good time. They were talking about how there was going to be a revolution and how the revolution was inevitable. So I thought, well, this is my opportunity to enlighten these three young people that they were wrong to anticipate a violent revolution, and that there were better ways now to bring about socialism that were more practical. And Barack Obama was furious. He looked at Caroline Boss, and I still remember these words all these years later. He said, "That is crazy." He was almost demeaning me and demeaning my intellectual contribution by saying that everything he had read from Francis Fanon, who was a third world revolutionary, was completely against what I was saying. And so that's where I started making the case empirically. You know, look at what happened in France. Look at what happened in Germany. Look at what happened in England. None of these places have had revolutions. But I could see with Barack Obama that he was listening and that he was absorbing my arguments.
You were debating with Obama not to tell him that socialism was not the goal or communism was not the goal, but a violent revolution wasn't the way to achieve it. What do you think Obama got out of that debate?
The way to achieve socialism was through working within the Democratic Party and pulling it further and further towards the left.
There is another enemy working hand in hand with the communists to destroy your country from within.
We call it the Red-Green Axis, an alliance of neo-communists and Islamic militants united by their hatred of Israel and America.
It was the communists who created the radical Islam.
The Muslim Brotherhood learned at the feet of the KGB.
Most of the Muslim terrorists think they're fighting for Allah, but the ones who trained them know better.
Back in the time of the Soviet Union even, there were concerted efforts on the part of the Kremlin and the KGB to reach out across the world to recruits, and they attended Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow. We used to call it KGB Tech. The Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, did attend and graduate from Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow. The relationship with the KGB formed at that time when he was a student there continues to this day. And if anybody wonders why the Iranian regime is so cushy with Putin and why Putin backs them so strongly, it's because this relationship is a close and a continuing one that goes back all those years.
Muslims condemn terrorism, Muslims condemn ISIS. What they're doing in my name is wrong.
There are significant numbers of American Muslims and European Muslims who actually do support the terrorists. Even if it's a small proportion, 10 to 15%, that's still hundreds of thousands of people living in Europe, living in America. How is America supposed to guard against this terrorist element?
All of us need to sit down on a table and talk and find out the solutions. If you push somebody, it's not the solution. We need to sit down and have a dialogue. There are Muslims, there are Christians, there are Jews who are intolerant, and we need to work with them.
But there are no Jewish suicide bombers. There are no Buddhist suicide bombers. There are no Christian suicide bombers.
Not in America.
Nowhere in the world are they.
The leading Islamic threat to America comes through the Muslim Brotherhood.
Under various crackdowns from the Egyptian government, the Muslim Brothers fled Egypt and went elsewhere. And it is when they went elsewhere that they got this training, this connection with the Soviets, in particular in training camps, terror training camps in places like Lebanon. And virtually every single Sunni Islamic terror group in the world today, you can trace their origins back to the granddaddy of them all, and that is the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Qaeda was formed from groups that originally were part of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Islamic State is an outgrowth of Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Not long after 9/11, the FBI raided a house in Annandale, Virginia, that had a sub-basement in which federal agents discovered the archives of the North American Muslim Brotherhood.
One of those documents was what we call now the Explanatory Memorandum. And it's very useful because it lays out in quite clear terms exactly what the Brotherhood wants to do to America. And it says, the Ikhwan must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad to destroy and eliminate the Western civilization from within and sabotage its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. But then, the bonus is the final page of the document.
One of them included a list of some of the Muslim Brotherhood's most prominent front organizations and controlled organizations in the US and Canada, written by the Brotherhood itself, so it wasn't an outside critic writing about this.
And it says at the top, our organizations and the organizations of our friends. How helpful was that?
This was sort of the Rosetta Stone that allowed us to decode who is under the control of the Muslim Brotherhood versus who is simply someone whose views might coincide out of religious freedom or Muslim rights or something like that.
And on that list are many of these major Muslim organizations in America today, mainstream Muslim organizations, and we know, as evidence in the Holy Land Foundation trial, that these are Muslim Brotherhood front groups.
That 5 individuals affiliated with this organization called the Holy Land Foundation were convicted on 105 counts of direct support to Hamas, somewhere between $12 and $60 million worth of support. There were other organizations affiliated across the country, known as unindicted co-conspirators at the time, who are still in operation today.
Today's most openly political Muslim Brotherhood front group is the Council on American Islamic Relations. CAIR's longtime executive director is Nihad Awad. Once a supporter of the pro-communist Palestine Liberation Organization, Nihad Awad now supports the officially designated terrorist group Hamas.
I used to support the PLO, and I used to be the president of the General Union for Science Students, which is part of the PLO here in the United States. But after I researched the situation inside Palestine and outside, I'm in support of the Hamas movement.
President George W. Bush, after the attacks up in the great big Islamic center of Northwest Washington, D.C. on Massachusetts Avenue, and he is in this big, beautiful mosque, talking about how Islam is a religion of peace.
Islam is peace.
Right over his left shoulder, within inches of the president's left shoulder, is Nihad Awad. So from that moment, when the president was advised, was told to speak these words, Islam is a religion of peace, our response to the attacks of 9/11 was off on the wrong track.
The government has brought individuals with well-known ties to Muslim Brotherhood front organizations like Council on American Islamic Relations, ISNA, and other ones into the administration to help formulate policy.
Have you seen any evidence of deep penetration by the Muslim Brotherhood into the security apparatus of the United States?
No, it's not true. It doesn't exist. It's a phantom.
Minnesota Congressman Keith Ellison is the perfect example of the Muslim Marxist alliance. In his student radical days, Keith Ellison worked with both pro-Chinese communists and the Nation of Islam. Congressman Ellison has held several fundraisers in the home of Minnesota Communist Party leader Erwin Marquette. He was elected with the help of Communist Party phone bankers. He has also written for the Communist Party website.
Representative Keith Ellison, representative from Minnesota, has very close ties to various known organizations within the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. For instance, CAIR. For instance, the Muslim American Society, or MAS, which a few years ago paid for his Hajj trip, his pilgrimage trip to Mecca.
He is absolutely protecting these organizations. You see him working with ISNA, you see him working with Muslim Public Affairs Council, Muslim American Society, Muslim Student Associations, all Muslim Brotherhood Hamas fronts in the United States and many others. And you see him not only protecting them, advocating for them through both use of his seat in Congress as well as pushing for agendas and legislation that would allow for what these terrorist jihadi organizations want.
Representative Army Bera of California serves on the influential House Foreign Affairs Committee. He works closely with CAIR and was elected with the help of a team from the Northern California Communist Party. Orange County, California Representative Loretta Sanchez serves on the Homeland Security Committee and is also the second-ranking Democrat on the powerful Armed Services Committee. In 1996, Loretta Sanchez entered Congress in a razor-thin, upset victory over conservative Republican Bob Dornan. Communist activist Paul Crabel explains how the Comrades worked to elect Loretta Sanchez.
The 1990 census changed the district somewhat. It brought more Latinos into it, but most of them were not registered to vote, and so people thought it was going to be a cakewalk for Dornan. Behind the scenes, there were voter registration organizations. They sent out teams of 1 to 2 dozen workers every day beginning at noon and knocking on doors to find new Latinos to register to vote.
Since her election, Loretta Sanchez has visited Cuba at least twice and has become very close to CAIR.
Loretta Sanchez, Congresswoman, who has been a good friend of CAIR's.
When Homeland Security Committee Chairman, New York Republican Peter King, held hearings on Muslim extremism in America, Loretta Sanchez leapt to CAIR's defense.
So we have been pushing back on him at every point where he turns to try to say that Muslims here are purposely making terrorists and birthing them here.
Chicago Congressman Luis Gutierrez once led the pro-Cuba Puerto Rican Socialist Party. Now he's all in for CAIR. This communist also served on the House Intelligence Committee.
And the job of the House Intelligence Committee, of course, is to oversee America's most sensitive intelligence programs, how we collect intelligence, how we assess that intelligence, the kinds of operations that we engage in to counter enemies of this country, foreign and, by the way, domestic as well.
Do any of the panelists today feel that our intelligence services, any one of them, has been somehow hoodwinked or fooled or duped by the groups in either Egypt or here, and specifically the Muslim Brotherhood?
Assalamu alaikum. I'm Congressman Andre Carson.
Representative Nancy Pelosi, as the senior minority Democratic member of the House of Representatives now, appointed Representative Andre Carson to, of all things, the Intelligence Committee.
Indiana's 7th District Representative Andre Carson has extensive ties to Muslim Brotherhood fronts and operatives.
The Intelligence Committee in the House oversees the FBI's counter-espionage and counter-intelligence operations in this country. These are critical capabilities. And a man who has access to such information and has such ties to the very people, in some cases, that should be the object of that kind of surveillance and counteractivity. It makes for, at a minimum, a security problem.
Representative Carson appears on a frequent basis at conferences sponsored by, held by CAIR, ISNA, ICNA.
Andre Carson has had long-standing ties to organizations and operatives sworn to the destruction of our country.
There are those who are thinking that at this convention right now, we're having secret meetings, that we're plotting to destroy this country. But I say to those who are here undercover, Allah will not allow you to stop us.
One of the things that we have learned is that the Muslim Brotherhood is intent on destroying Western civilization from within.
We have to groom the next city councilor, the next governor, the future president, the first Muslim president.
With his known self-identified background in association with Marxists and with jihadist Muslim Brotherhood groups and individuals, one cannot imagine how such a person would have a clearance of any level, much less a clearance to serve on the Intelligence Committee of the U.S. House of Representatives.
Perhaps an even more important target to America's enemies is the House Judiciary Committee. This is the body that oversees the Federal Bureau of Investigation and sets its budget and priorities. Luis Gutierrez serves on this committee. So does longtime Democratic Socialists of America ally Jerry Nadler of New York. Then there's Judy Chu from California, a friend of CAIR, a longtime affiliate of the Maoist Communist Workers' Party and Communist China's best friend in Congress. But the most concerning of all is Senior Judiciary Committee Democrat John Conyers of Michigan.
Back to his early days in Congress, he was a complete supporter of the Communist Party.
In 1975, John Conyers participated along with a number of other congressmen, Don Edwards and Charlie Rangel, at a World Peace Conference meeting here in Washington, including on the Hill, And the World Peace Council was a Soviet front operated by the KGB and the International Affairs Department of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The Communist Party, as we knew it, the old one, began to disintegrate because of gentrification and a challenge by the Democratic Socialists in the early 1980s. So a lot of people who had been hardcore party front supporters migrated to the DSA, which is more of a mass political organization as opposed to a hardcore Stalinist party.
A few years later, he's one of the #1 defenders in Congress of all these different Muslim Brotherhood front organizations.
Which kind of Muslim Brotherhood fronts has he been involved with?
Council on American Islamic Relations would be the first and foremost.
So you would call John Conyers one of the biggest apologists for the Muslim Brotherhood in Congress?
At minimum, yes.
Several Republican congressmen are working to officially designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization.
H.R. 3892 simply asks the State Department to do what it should have done long ago: recognize the Muslim Brotherhood as a foreign terrorist organization that threatens the United States.
Since we already know that the Muslim Brotherhood is the parent of Hamas, and that these organizations are overtly supporting Hamas and other like-minded organizations around the world, then we should shut those organizations down. And that would send a shockwave throughout the pro-Sharia, pro-jihad Islamic world without firing a single shot or dropping a bomb anywhere in the world.
I want to urge all of you on both sides of the aisle to join me in opposing H.R. 3892. Since swearing off violence in the 1950s, the Brotherhood has become a predominantly non-religious or a non-violent religious political and social service organization.
There's really no difference in what he's doing on the Muslim Brotherhood's behalf that he didn't do with the communists before.
Once Congress had a powerful internal security committee to guard against domestic enemies.
The Democratic caucus, in a secret meeting, abolished the House Internal Security Committee. They cut their funding out of the budget. A deal was made between the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Rodino, Democrat of New Jersey, and John Conyers, who's as one of the senior members, with the Republican minority, that they would take the function of the House Internal Security Committee and move them into the House Judiciary Committee as a subcommittee. Unfortunately for everyone, Rodino lied, Conyers lied, and they totally destroyed the internal security functions of the House and never reconstituted any kind of internal security committee. As Conyers grew in seniority on the House Judiciary Committee, he gained oversight on FBI operations and funding, which was very crucial.
What would happen to the FBI's budget if they ever came after John Conyers or his many pro-communist colleagues in Congress?
There would be a lot of pressure not to do it.
Even Hillary Clinton's 2016 running mate, Tim Kaine, has Muslim Brotherhood connections.
In May 2012, Democrat leaders Nancy Pelosi, Andre Carson, and Keith Ellison joined CARE leader Nihad Awad and other Muslim Brotherhood operatives at the founding of the National Muslim Democratic Council. According to a confidential memo, the group had 3 main goals: re-elect President Obama, defeat anti-Muslim Brotherhood Florida Congressman Allen West, elect Virginia Governor Tim Kaine to the U.S. Senate. Tim Kaine has long been close to the Muslim Brotherhood Front, MAS, or Muslim American Society. A MAS leader, Marty Bray, boasted his organization had helped first elect Kaine in 2005 by signing up 65,000 new Muslim voters. In May 2007, Governor Kaine keynoted one of Marty Bray's MAS fundraising events. Marty Bray had self-identified as a Hamas supporter at a 2000 rally in Washington, D.C., addressed by the infamous Abdul Rahman Alamundi.
Anybody support this Hamas here?
When Clinton was the president, His key Muslim advisor, who would carte blanche entree into the White House, was a guy by the name of Al-Mundi. Al-Mundi is currently serving a 23-year federal prison sentence for terrorist financing.
Also in 2007, Governor Kaine appointed another mass leader, Dr. Issam Omesh, to the Virginia Commission on Immigration, but had to fire him when this speech came to light.
And the deliberate targeting of civilians through the barbaric, indiscriminate, disproportionate Israeli war machine is indeed criminal and must end now.
I, while clearly disappointed and dismayed, along with the Muslim community of Virginia, wish to continue to work with the governor.
The Muslim Brotherhood and Senator Tim Kaine both want increased Muslim settlement in America.
It will only happen if we all work together to make sure that America is still open and welcoming to the refugees.
And they want to bar Muslims from entering the United States of America. And to make matters worse, they've tried to stop immigrants, refugees, and international travelers from traveling into this great country.
And the House passed a bill in November to try to keep out refugees from Syria and Iraq, and they called the bill Securing America Against Foreign Enemies Act. Enemies. Refugees are enemies. And thank goodness, Senator Shaheen and others, we've been able to block that bill so far.
We don't actually know who they are. We don't know what the standards are used by the UN to vet them. We don't really know their true names, where they were really born. Their entire identities are being created, and then they present themselves to us at the border of America, and we're supposed to just let them in, no questions asked.
Anybody who calls for comprehensive immigration reform, in my judgment, is trying to get the MVP award from ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
Welcoming others is part of what it means to be an American.
Barack Obama is fulfilling what he can of his promise to fundamentally transform America. That means changing the demographics of the United States. You have the President of the United States going out of his way to invite avowed enemies of the United States to migrate to this country and live here in large numbers. And you don't have anyone in Congress raising the constitutional question, wait a minute, these people are advocating Sharia law in this country? That's advocating the overthrow of our Constitution. They should not be allowed in.
So, we put some terrorists, and the government becomes angry with the terrorists, it persecutes the terrorists, but at the same time, it doesn't want to have a war with the whole of Islam. So, the more terrorists, bombs and killings you have, the more the Western governments open the doors to the Islamic immigration.
They don't see it as an invasion. They see it as coming in and taking possession of lands and countries that are already rightfully theirs. They just happen to be currently occupied by people who are not Muslim.
So how does this tie in to illegal immigration?
Which organization in America 25 years ago was leading the charge against illegal immigrants? Against? The AFL-CIO, the unions. So in 2015, which organization is leading the charge to legalize the illegals? The unions. And I'll tell you why, folks. Why the change?
Once, American unions were led by anti-communists who were willing to work with both Republicans and Democrats.
And under no circumstances should the American Federation of Labor tie itself to a political party.
But in 1994, everything changed.
There are changes in the attitudes of organized labor in this country, starting with the new leadership in the AFL-CIO that was elected in 1994, the prohibition on communists holding office in U.S. labor unions was dropped.
The labor movement is an essential cornerstone of transformative politics.
Now every major labor union is controlled by communists and leftists and are completely in the tank for the DSA-controlled Democrats.
Hello, SEIU. I am so proud to have earned the endorsement of the Service Employees International Union and your 2 million members. Your fights are my fights.
They are now effectively dictating all of the Democratic Party policy. You know, 25 years ago, it was the AFL-CIO, the unions, who were the hardest core for immigration enforcement. But now, they are leading the charge.
Yes.
So what's in it for them?
Are you kidding? The two elixirs, power and money. The unions want more members, and they want more dues. The more members they have, the more leverage they have. The more dues they have, the more money they have, and the more leverage they have.
We have a union movement that is not interested in the welfare of the workers. We have a union movement that is interested in promoting communism.
One of the communist-controlled unions' greatest successes has been changing official Democratic Party policy from strong opposition to illegal immigration.
And the illegal alien population is growing by more than 250,000 people a year, we think. Yet we're doing almost nothing to encourage these people to go home or even to deter them from coming here in the first place.
To militantly supporting amnesty for illegals.
We have to have a pathway to legalization. It has to get done. We have to work hard to get it done.
Isn't it about time we had a president who understands that 12 million workers in the shadows is not acceptable in this country?
If we cannot get comprehensive immigration reform as we need and as we should, then I will go as far as I can, even beyond President Obama.
Before immigration debates took place in Washington, I talked with Alcea Medina.
Alcea Medina is one of this country's most influential communists, a member of Democratic Socialists of America and a leader of the 1.8 million strong SEIU. Medina has crisscrossed America promoting amnesty for more than 20 years. The big question is why?
The Democrats know that in order to gain permanent progressive majority, they need more voters. And those voters are not going to come from the United States.
We reformed the immigration laws. It puts 12 million people on the path to citizenship and eventually voters.
And there's not 11 million of them. There's between 20 and 50 million.
And we add to that the million Latino citizens who this year will turn 18, plus all our allies in the African American community, the LGBT voters and younger voters.
We have to register every single Muslim to vote in 2016.
Environmental voters, women voters, Asian voters, union voters.
Can you imagine if we have 2 out of 3, if we have 80 million new voters?
The Muslim vote can be the swing vote in major states.
We will create a governing coalition for the long term, not just for an election cycle.
Together, we are the new American coalition that will dominate politics for decades to come.
The last presidential election, Mitt Romney, the Republican candidate, lost that election by 2.5 million votes. So if you can legalize 10, 20, maybe 30 million illegals in this country and give them voting rights, the majority of whom 75% will vote Democrat. They know that. So that will give the Democrats 10, 20, 30 million more votes. So how can the Republicans ever expect to compete with that?
They can't. They just simply can't. I mean, it's fait accompli. It's game over. They can't.
So from that point, effectively, you have a one-party state in America, which will be controlled by the Democratic Party, which is controlled by the unions, and the unions are controlled by the Marxists. So these people that come to this country for better wages, for better futures for their families, for the liberties they don't have in their own country, are being used by the communist-controlled unions to turn this country into a communist state.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Their enjoyment of the freedoms and the benefits of American society will be very short-lived.
So why aren't your intelligence services protecting America from these internal threats?
The FBI is not allowed to be concerned about these issues anymore. It has literally become a career-ending offense for an FBI agent or official to reflect a level of concern about the extent to which there is Muslim Brotherhood influence taking place here.
The most obvious indicator of their access is what we call the Great Purge of 2011 and 12, when all the training material that was deemed by yet unnamed specialists within the Muslim community designated certain portions of training courses as being inflammatory, inaccurate, stigmatizing, or racist or bigoted.
You were training people in the Muslim Brotherhood network. What happened to you? What kind of pushback did you get?
When I set up the training, I did it because of my frustration, and I did go through the proper channels in the FBI, laid out the training program, and said, this is the problem. We have a massive network here. We have agents and analysts and leadership, quite frankly, that's unaware of this. Will you support this? And initially the response was absolutely. You know, I come from a background. I'm a Naval Academy graduate. I'm a combat veteran in the Marine Corps. I believe in this country, and I believe in doing what needs to be done, you know, mission accomplishment. And here was a huge gap in what the FBI wasn't doing. When you have a gap, you train people on that. And so I did it. Now, I had poured months and months of my time into this. Afterwards, what happened? I went back to the office, got a pat on the back. They said, my supervisor said, good job. Don't ever do that again. And oh, by the way, because you've been pouring all your time into training, here are the things that you're delinquent on. You know, your paperwork, your monthly paperwork for sources, for investigative reports that are supposed to be done every 30 to 60 days, every 90-day reports that weren't done because of this. And so my next evaluation, I was hammered. And it was clear to me that both headquarters and the office were not happy that I had done this, because what I had done was exposed the organizations that FBI headquarters and the Washington field office were actually working with were jihadis, were terrorists, are terrorists.
2009, right after the Fort Hood shooting, during this time I was an instructor with the Naval Postgraduate School based in Monterey, California, and they had a project for the Army to train field grade officers and senior non-commissioned officers prior to their deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. So I was one of the trainers, and my area was psychological operations and information operations. But then the module on how American soldiers should perceive Islam was run by a Muslim Brotherhood operative. Very pleasant fellow, very nice guy to talk to, but didn't really socialize with us, didn't socialize with our Afghan colleagues. And during one of the lunches one day, one of my Afghan colleagues, who's a devout Muslim, said, stay away from that guy, he's with the Muslim Brotherhood. His name is Louis Safi. I had entered testimony into a Senate hearing naming Louis Safi as one of the Muslim Brotherhood agents in the United States, not realizing I was sitting right next to him and the same guy in this training program. This was 3 weeks after the shooting at Fort Hood, and we were at Fort Hood. I raised this as a security problem, and the Army said, no, we don't investigate civilians. So they let the guy off. I was then removed from the training program because I blew the whistle, and I didn't even make a public issue of it at the time.
So we've been completely blindfolded and handcuffed. We can't use the most basic, fundamental language that they themselves use to help us understand what Islam believes and what its intentions are.
We could have prosecuted mosques and Islamic societies tied to this network. The Council on American Islamic Relations was the next target, but that was shut down by Attorney General Eric Holder.
So these people who were working with hostile foreign intelligence services and communist movements are then using their influence on Capitol Hill to shut down FBI investigations.
Those of us who took our oath are being betrayed. Things like what happened to me will happen more and more often because people will be forced to stand up for the law at the risk of their career and maybe even their life.
The Democratic Party leadership is riddled with security risks and domestic enemies. And the very worst of all may well be Hillary Rodham Clinton. Like many young Americans, Hillary Rodham entered college as a staunch conservative. She left a raving socialist. Part of this transformation can be blamed squarely on her political mentor, Chicago Marxist radical Saul Alinsky.
People do not get power except when they take it.
Hillary Clinton did her thesis on Saul Alinsky.
While still in college, Hillary Rodham also interned in the San Francisco law firm of Robert Truhaft and Doris Bryn Walker. Both were longtime Communist Party members and senior officials in the Soviet-controlled International Association of Democratic Lawyers. While serving as U.S. Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton's Clinton Foundation entered into a very profitable partnership with the Russian government-funded Skolkovo Foundation. In 2014, the FBI warned that Skolkovo was being used by Russian intelligence to funnel U.S. high technology into Vladimir Putin's rapidly expanding war machine.
Could Hillary Clinton pass an FBI security check?
No, because if you have overt ties to organizations with known associations with terrorism, you cannot pass a background check.
And you hear a lot about Huma Abedin, Secretary Clinton's longtime confidant, but do you really know who she is?
Huma Abedin has been a longtime close assistant for Hillary Clinton. So Huma Abedin comes with a family that has long time since been closely associated with the Muslim Brotherhood. The Saudi government established the Institute for Muslim Minority Affairs and put in charge of this group Huma Abedin's father. Then was established a journal for the IMMA. Huma Abedin's father was made editor, and eventually her mother was a co-editor. And Huma Abedin herself served on the editorial board of this journal for quite a number of years. Also serving on that editorial board of the journal was a Saudi, a very senior Saudi, by the name of Abdullah Omar Nassif, the founder of something called the Rabita Trust. This is a financial institution that was founded prior to 9/11 for the explicit purpose of funding Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, while Huma Abedin, not only working with him side by side, she was in the White House as an intern with Hillary Clinton. Then she went on to serve with Hillary Clinton as her aide, as a senior advisor during her Senate campaigns and her service as a U.S. Senator from New York. And eventually, when Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State from 2009 until 2013, Huma Abedin was her Deputy Chief of Staff. Now, this is a period of time when we might recall that U.S. foreign policy flipped on its head from going after jihad and jihadists like Al-Qaeda to, in Libya, for example, aiding and abetting known Al-Qaeda jihadist militias to overthrow a sitting sovereign government led by Muammar Gaddafi, no choir boy to be sure, but our ally at the time. All of this happened during the period of time when Clinton was Secretary of State and Huma Abedin was at her side, whispering in her ear.
No one with Huma Abedin's baggage of ties with groups that seek the overthrow of the Constitution of the United States should ever have any government post in the United States.
Hillary Clinton's ties are a lot deeper, broader, and wider than Huma Abedin. The best example of her Islamic ties is her affiliation with the Istanbul process, and in particular with UN Resolution 1618.
This resolution marks a step forward in creating a safe global environment for practicing and expressing one's beliefs.
That resolution, that essentially criminalizes defamation of Islam, has been backed for 10 years by the Organization of Islamic Conference, a 57-nation organization. It is essentially run in its leadership positions by members of the Muslim Brotherhood.
And I want to applaud the organization of the Islamic Conference for its leadership in securing the recent resolution by the United Nations Human Rights Council.
By endorsing UN Resolution 1618, by default, Hillary Clinton is aiding and abetting the Muslim Brotherhood on a macro global level.
When you have a politician who seeks higher office and you know that there is nothing that politician won't do in order to get there, then that's an opportunity for you as an intelligence officer. And Hillary's a double. She's in a position where she can be blackmailed for her behavior, and then there's nothing that she won't do to get what she wants. So she would be a prime candidate for any foreign intelligence service to at least surround her with its own people so that they can influence her as a senator or a secretary of state or even as president.
That is a sworn law enforcement officer who took a vow to protect our country from threat, both foreign and domestic. Hillary Clinton is a domestic threat.
But I don't want to depress you people with any of that or bring you down in any way. Am I a little bit late? Sorry about that. Look, this is how I see it, folks.